All right. Well, I think we're gonna go ahead and get some stuff started here. Everybody, welcome. You are in Symposium's one-on-one. We're having a comics conversation with Bryce McLellan. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
And our very own development exec here at Pipeline, Spike Scarberry. We're really excited. I'm going to be slipping off screen just so everybody knows, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce these two guys to you tonight because we have a really great session planned for you. It's just an hour, but we're going to get into the depths of what it is to develop a comic book. And honestly, taking a comic book and trying to get into, adaptation into screenplay versions, like Bryce went through all of that with his comic book Verge. And we want to be able to get into that. So first, I'm going to introduce Spike over here, who is our very own. Like I said, he is a veteran of the Hollywood development landscape. Having worked for an agency, production company, a TV network, Spike has kind of been in the plethora of the TV and film industry. He's one of our most experienced ones here at Pipeline. He also enjoys, just so you know, long walks on the beach, candlelight dinners, and a dynamic storytelling. So do not give him anything subpar, for sure. And we also have Bryce over here, who's our guest from Sydney, Australia. He's a writer, a director, a journalist. Based in Australia, he's the creator of the comic Verge, published by Red 5. He also directs documentaries with a human rights and environmental focus, including Seed, which received national TV broadcast, and Jesus in Congo, which was acquired by the United Nations. He's currently shooting a sci-fi feature film, Earthbound, and has already gotten some really good news on that project as of yesterday, right? We were so enthusiastic about that.
Yeah. Yesterday, I found out that we've got domestic and international pre-sales kind of locked in, ready to go. So
amazing.
Kind of big step that's going to take us closer to production. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys, I'm going to give up the hour to you guys. I'm going to slip off, but if you need anything, Jeannie and I will be right here. All right. Have fun.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth.
Well, Bryce, I'll kind of kick off the conversation here a little bit because we were chatting right before this started, just kind of about your entire history. The reason I was picked to kind of be part of this one-on-one is that I'm trying to develop a comic book as well. And so I'm looking at someone like you who's actually done it, who's taken a screenplay that he wrote and turned it into a comic and actually got it to a publisher. So I guess, first of all, why don't you tell the people who are watching this right now a little bit about how you were able to develop this idea and what you kind of did to get it and decide to make it into a comic first and foremost.
Sure. So it started out as a feature film, actually, that I wrote, and I submitted it to Pipeline, and you guys awarded it the Great Idea Contest Winner Award back in 2016. And after that, there was a lot of development, and we ended up deciding it was actually better as a TV show. So I rewrote it as a pilot, and then kind of pitched it around Hollywood for quite a while. We were pitching it. And I think no one ever disliked it. Everyone loved the idea. But I think what happened was we never were able to get it in front of someone who could get enough money to make it, because it was quite an expensive idea.
What was the idea, first of all?
Yeah, so it's set in New York, and it's set in this version of New York where people from the past have time traveled to the present, and they kind of live in their own communities in New York. So it was kind of inspired a lot by the immigration movements in the early 20th century. So, in New York, you have Chinatown and Little Italy, and these are regions where people migrated and built their own communities there, Italians and Chinese and all sorts of migrants. So in this version of New York, we had Viking Town and Little Egypt and Little Babylon and all these kind of, people from the past building their own communities inside New York. And our main character is a cop who is tasked with sort of policing all these different groups. So very expensive to do. So I think we were never able to really get it to someone who I think could command a budget to make it. And I was a bit discouraged by that, because it was such a visual world and I spent so much time on it, and characters meant so much to me. And I've always been a fan of comics, always liked reading comics. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just make it into a comic, because that way at least the world exists in some form and you can see it. Because one of the hardest things about having a lot of unproduced screenplays is that they're not finished until they become a film, and most screenplays don't ever make it to film or TV. And so, you know, no one reads them except for other readers and writers. So yeah, I really wanted this world to exist in some form, and comics seem like the best way to do that.
Yeah, no, I definitely resonate with that. I mean, the only people who read unproduced screenplays are either aspiring writers or people who are professional readers at the studio network level, or development executives, or your mom. I mean, that's essentially all whoever reads unproduced screenplays. And
you got your mum to read your screenplay? I've never succeeded at getting my mum to.
Let me tell you, my mom loves me a lot. I don't know what happens over there in Australia, but yes, my mom will read my screenplays for me. But no, you're right. Like you put so much time and effort and energy into writing these things. You want someone to experience that. And so I totally get that. Before we dive into the process of actually turning into a comic, though, talk a little bit about the development experience at Pipeline, because it started as a screenplay, and then kind of through your work with the executives there, before I even joined the company, you decided to turn it into a TV series. So how did that process go? What were those conversations like? What were the challenges there? Any experiences you remember?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say that you guys were amazing. Like, the development support I received was incredible. Every time I got some notes, they were absolutely spot on. And I think it was really my development as a writer that made me realize that it just wasn't working as a feature, and that I wasn't experienced enough to realize that until I had, you know, a reader tell me, essentially, this shouldn't be a feature, this should be a TV show. So yeah, like those, I think I really came a long way as a writer through that development process. Like, looking back on the feature script, oh, I cringe. I can't even bring myself to read it. It's just nowhere near as good as where I think we've ended up with, either with the TV pilot or with the comic.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's
fantastic notes.
It's one of those things where when you first have a story that you fall in love with, you have an idea of how you want to tell the story, but the deeper you get into it, the more you kind of start realizing, wait, a feature film is really a small story, right? Because you have max 2.5 hours, like maybe 3 if you really push it. But for a world like yours, and for full disclosure, I was reading Bryce's comic before we got on here, and it's really good. Like, for a world as deep as yours, you kind of need that additional time to kind of like expand on all the different areas and the different people and all the characters. So I agree, like my gut would be this is a TV show as well, because then you get 10 hours every season, multiple seasons, to kind of dive into all this stuff and really expand upon it. So it does feel more like a long-term story from at least what I read.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's kind of amazing now that I couldn't see that at the time. But that's what the notes are for. That's what the development's for. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone has their blind spots when writing.
Yeah. Well, I think when I write, I generally start with like a plot, an idea of a story that I want, how I want it to start and how I want it to end. And then I start to add the characters and the themes and so on. And because of that, I think it's a little plot focused. And, you know, films they're generally more plot heavy than TV shows. And the more you get into the writing of it, I think the more you flesh out the characters, then you start to think, actually, this world is bigger than I initially gave it time and credit for. So, you know, you kind of, I think, moving out of that plot focused form of writing into that character and world building kind of writing, that's what makes kind of richer stories. And richer stories tend to want to be bigger than two hours.
Yeah, those are the ones that resonate with you for a long time, for sure. And I'm laughing because I've had the exact same experience. So I feel like we're in a kind of similar space. But so after you pitched it around town, didn't get any traction, you said, I want someone to experience this story. I'm going to make it as a comic book. So what was the process in terms of taking it from a TV script to a comic script? And then talk a little bit about the process of actually making it. And just for everyone who's watching here, I have kind of like a similar thing where I'm trying to get a comic made. And so I would love to hear this story because I feel like we're going to have some similar experiences there.
Yeah, well, first thing I did was I kind of reached out to all the people I know who work in comics and kind of got some recommendations for an artist, and met with the artist. I kind of liked his style and his approach. And so we agreed to do one issue together. And so I started to read books on how to write comic scripts and learning the differences between comics and screenplays. Because I'd always read comics, but when you're reading them, you're enjoying them, you aren't thinking too critically. So I think this is probably my number one piece of advice. If there's only one thing you take away from this conversation, it's that when you're doing an adaptation, you really need to take the time to learn the strengths and weaknesses of the different formats you're in. It's not like you have a screenplay and you're going to turn into a comic, so you just sort of open 2 documents and you copy paste so the formatting matches. You've really got to work out what works in comics, what doesn't, and it meant a kind of ground up story rebuild for the comic. So we did that first issue with this artist, a guy called Marcelo, who's in Australia as well. And then I sent that issue to a bunch of publishers. A couple wrote back. I really liked Red 5 and their approach. They're very kind of storytelling savvy. They're also industry savvy. So went with them. They loved the idea, but they didn't think the issue that I'd made was presenting that idea as well as it could have, because the way I told the story was that the world of this, this New York world where all these people from the past are there, that's revealed at the end of issue 1. And they said, we need this right up front. So they said, can you do a different issue 1 and maybe this is issue 2? And I just couldn't work out how to kind of take the issue 1 I had and push it later in the 4-issue series.
Can I ask a question real fast? So did you actually pay the artist to do the entire first issue with New York at the end first? And then Red 5 was like, no, you need to pay to do it all over again?
They didn't say I had to do it again. They just said that issue 1 needs to have New York a lot earlier. So they said you can make issue 1 that you've currently got issue 2, but I couldn't work out a way to do that. So I ended up trashing that first issue and doing 4 new issues with a different artist.
Okay, so just so to make sure everyone understands, so basically you wrote a script for this first issue in comic form. You then took your own money and you paid this artist to draw it out for you. And I assume you paid a colorist too to color the pages for you. And you might have even paid a letterer to letter the pages for you. You put all this money in yourself and you made this first issue. And then you took it to the publisher and they were like, no, we can't use this.
They weren't, we can't use this. I think if I'd really pushed and said, no, it has to be this, I think they might have done it. But they were right that it would have been better to start with, putting the concept up front and center. And so it was a storytelling decision that I made, that rather than try and create 3 issues that work around the existing issue 1, I just create 4 new issues. And the artist that I was working with, he was a bit slow and was a bit expensive as well, to be honest. So it was also a chance to find a new artist and change the visual style a little bit as well.
Yeah, and tell the people watching. So when you say he was slow, and if you don't mind, and when you say he was expensive, do you mind sharing his page rate and how often he was delivering you pages?
Yes, he was. I think he took about 9 months to do that 1 issue.
9 months to do 22, 27 pages, something like that.
24 pages.
Oof, that's
I don't remember how much he charged, but it was a lot.
Yeah, but it was still personal money that you had. It was out of your pocket.
Yeah, it was. I think the artist that I got for the next 2 issues, he was less than half the rate of the Australian guy, just because he was in Brazil, and I think Australia has a very small industry, so consequently the page rates are quite high.
And quite frankly, currency exchange between the United States or Australia and Brazil is probably going to be in our favor. I mean, our currency goes farther in one of those countries than it does here, so they'll inherently charge less because they're making more when it transfers over. That's one of the things. So okay, so you made this first issue, you had to go with the other 4. What was the conversation like with? Actually, let me ask you this. How was the experience with the first artist, Marcelo, who was Australian, and the artist who actually did the comic that you have? How was that experience different working with them?
I think Marcelo was very enthusiastic at the start, but that enthusiasm dropped off as time went on. And the problem, a big problem with making a comic is that once you commit to an artist, they actually have a lot of power over the project. Like they can promise that they'll work at this rate, but ultimately there's no real way to hold them to that. So I think, you know, whichever artist you go with, you have to really spend some time with them to sort of learn how they think, how they approach creative work, and work out whether their enthusiasm is genuine or if it's, you know, just at the start of the project. Right. The second artist, he was quite a bit more professional, and he just delivered pages at a better rate at the end of the day. But then COVID happened, and he got quite sick, and his parents got quite sick, and the page rate slowed again. So I had to go with another artist for the last two issues. So there's been a total of 3 artists on this, and of the published issues, there were 2 artists. And the break actually kind of worked. That the Brazilian artist did the first 2 issues, and then we got a guy from the Philippines to do issues 3 and 4. And we actually had the same colorist the whole time, which was good because he kind of kept the same colors throughout. And there's a very unique color language that's used, and it's consistent through. So that really helped with the transition between artists.
No, that's one thing I noticed when I was reading your work. I feel like the colors really do help create the mood, because it's kind of like a dark and seedy atmosphere. It feels very like New York in like these dark depths of like the dark alleys. So I think that really comes through on the page. When you eventually were able to get these made, and you gave them to Red 5 and they said, all right, we're going to take these out. Did you do all 4 at once, or did you go with the monthly release date option? Because for the people, again, who are watching, who don't know how comics get made, if it's a monthly release, like you have with a lot of the stuff coming out now, Something's Killing the Children, Saga, any of those long running series, those artists are, penciling and maybe even inking 22 pages a month, which if you want weekends off is essentially a page a day, which is a very hefty workload. So how did you guys talk about actually getting this out once you had it made?
Yeah, well, Red 5's policy is that if they commit to 4 issues, they want to have all 4 issues complete before they go to Diamond, which is the big publisher that publishes all comics in America and most of the world. And it's because this happens a lot that people promise that they're going to get an issue a month, and then they don't. It takes 2 months or 3 months or even longer. So Red 5 doesn't want to jeopardize their relationship with Diamond, and so consequently they say, if we're going to do 4 issues, once we have all 4 issues, then we're going to publish. Bigger publishers like Image, DC, Marvel, they have a lot more weight, but also they have a lot more, because they have a lot more industry cachet. The artists generally do what they agree to do and do the work when they're working for Marvel.
Yeah, because that's the dream. Everyone wants to work for Marvel. Everyone's hoping to get a Spider-Man or a Batman or one of those comics of their youth. They want those runs for sure, right?
Yeah, the ones that just go on forever and ever.
Yeah, those are the paychecks that just keep cashing over and over and over again, and people generally don't get bored of those.
Yeah, although if you create one of those, generally it's the publisher that will own the character and own the story. So it's not necessarily going to translate to money in your bank account.
Yeah, well, let's pause on that, because that was another question I had in terms of creator owned versus studio owned. But so you delivered these 4 issues to the comic publisher, you put them out into the world. Was there any kind of how was the reception? Did they help you in terms of marketing? Kind of talk about the lead up to actually putting these out in the world and what happened there. And then once they were out in the world, kind of how did the world react to it? Yeah,
well, Red 5 were really great, and they did something for Verge that I couldn't really do, which is they hit the ground in America at all the conventions and so on. They were pushing it, because I think with comics, it's very much a fan-facing industry. The fans come to conventions, they talk to writers and artists and publishers, and that's how comics kind of gain traction and make inroads with an audience, is through kind of directly going to the fans. And I had plans to come over to the States for Comic-Con and all of that, but it was during COVID, and so I couldn't do it. So the publisher was really good in promoting Verge as much as they could through. They did some promotional stuff, but you really can't substitute that direct fan interaction.
Right.
That they did, yeah.
Right.
And I think Red 5 was happy with the sales. Like, they weren't incredible, but they were good enough.
Yeah. Are you going to work with them again? Do you now that you have this out there and you have proven work, do you now have a creative team that you can kind of go and make more projects with, or how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, well, I went through 3 different artists before I found one that was reliable and did the work. So I would absolutely love to work with Dexter again. He was the 3rd artist. So yeah, I think it takes a lot of time to make comics. So I'm trying to work out how I can balance more issues with the other stuff that I'm working on. But I would absolutely love to keep making comics, and I think Red 5 are keen as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, man, we were talking about this before we got on here, but your experience needing to get multiple artists before you find the right one is not one that is, novel to you. I think that happens to a ton of people. It happened to me. So just for everyone watching, I similarly during the pandemic realized that I had just left the film industry, kind of got tired of that. But I had just discovered the comic medium. One of my bosses, I was a development assistant over at a big TV network. And right before I left, one of my bosses threw a comic on my desk and he said, "Hey, I don't know what this is, but I hear it's good. Read it and see if it can be a TV series." And I had never read a comic in my life. I didn't grow up on Batman. I watched Spider-Man the cartoon and X-Men the cartoon, but I never actually read the comics. And so I said, all right, this is something that's assigned to me. I better read it. And it was the first issue of Saga. And if no one here has read Saga, it is one of the best, not only comics, like stories that I have ever read. It completely, I got addicted to it. I read what my boss had given me. And then I went to Barnes and Noble that very night, and I went and found more of it on the shelves and read it in the aisles because I had to get the story just straight into my veins. So it really made me fall in love with comics, which, I think that you'll agree, Bryce, that medium can take more chances than a TV or a movie studio can, because the cost of production is just astronomically different, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I wanted to make a comic too. I ended up writing a script during the pandemic, and then I saved up a bunch of money so I can go out to artists. And basically the long story short of it is I lost $4,000 on 2 different artists, neither of which ever delivered exactly what I wanted them to. The first guy was also a Brazilian artist who I found on Reddit. There really is no, unless you know of one, Bryce, there really is kind of no central hub of where artists gather. You just kind of find them advertising their services wherever. Where did you find the second artist that you had?
I talked to an editor who worked for Marvel for quite a few years, and he recommended him. Even so, it wasn't the best recommendation.
Yeah, but you at least had the word of mouth from someone in the industry. I'm just Googling where to hire an artist, and I ended up finding a subreddit called Comic Book Collabs, where artists will go and post their portfolio and say, "Hey, here's how much I charge a page. I can do this many pages a month. Please hire me." I found a guy on there who had just excellent work. He was just really good on the page. I can even share my screen and kind of show you some of the stuff that he did for me, because it was just so good. So here are some of the inked pages that he kind of got here, where just the crisp lines and the facial expressions I thought were just excellent. Kind of coming in, got some more stuff. He was just really just blew me away on the page. And so I didn't really ask any questions in terms of who to hire, I didn't know what even to ask. So I was just you're great on the page, you're hired, you say you can do this much, you're hired. And long story short of it, he promised to get 22 pages a month, similar to what you were saying. And he ended up getting 2 pages a month, to the point where it was 6 months into the process. I think I'd gotten 12, 13, 14 pages in, which was just not going to work, because my dream was to kind of give it to an Image Comics and say, "Hey, do this. I know I want to do this as a monthly series." And then when he, couldn't do that, when he slowed down to such a slow pace, I had to say, "Hey man, we gotta cut ties and we gotta go here." And he was unhappy about that because I'm sure he wanted to keep getting paid, but eventually, like, we're the small business owners in this sense. And if the employee is not meeting the requirements of the job, unfortunately, you have to cut ties. And that sounds a little bit like what happened to you with your first artist with Dexter, right?
Dexter was the third artist, so he was the good one.
Yeah.
Marcelo
was the first one.
Yeah, it happened twice. Like it wasn't as slow as 2 pages a month. That's quite bad. But there is a drop off. I do think it's a bit like when you're renovating your house and the builder says it'll cost this much and take this long. It never does. It always costs more. It always takes longer. So I think you go to an artist, you hear what they propose, and then you probably add a month to it or more. But if I could go back in time, I would be not as nice to the artist. Because the first time he was slow with pages, I was like, "Oh, good, don't worry about it. We'll pick up speed later. I understand you got other stuff going on." No, I was too nice. Yeah, I gave him a little bit of rope, and he took a mile. So
I did the exact same thing, man. Because like no one wants to be the hard-nosed asshole boss who like works their employees to the bone, especially when like they're coming at you with every excuse under the sun. Oh, there's a hole in my roof. Oh, my wrist hurts. Oh, like my dad's got cancer. Like all of those things were things that my first artist said. And at a certain point, you have to be like, okay, I get that, but you're not delivering what you promised me either. And so like at some point, the rub kind of comes in. So let's just say hypothetically, and I'll answer this question too, but I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. The next time you go to hire an artist, let's assume that Dexter is not available. What are some of the questions that you're going to ask to try to like wean out some of the bad artists so you don't have a bad experience again?
Yeah, I think what I would probably do is look at their previous work and then talk to whoever employed them on that project. So find the writer and ask, look, what was it actually like working with this person? Because the art might be amazing, but if it took 6 years to do, then you don't want to work with that person. And I probably wouldn't. Most artists won't work unless they get paid at least 50% upfront. I think that's a reasonable precaution on their part, because you got to remember they're taking risk as well. Like they could draw a page and then you disappear on them. Right. So there's a lot of trust that's required from both parties. I probably wouldn't pay a lot upfront. I would pay page by page. And if they're not meeting the deadline, maybe you have a backup plan. Maybe you have another artist in the wings who has a very similar style and they can kind of fill in a little bit. Maybe you have an artist who is going to do the line work and the color and the lettering, and when they slow down, you bring in a colorist to take over. And that way you keep the same line art style. That might be a good way to do it.
You took the words out of my mouth, because my experience, I learned a couple things having been, having to fire one artist to get scammed by another. Number one, I will never enter into another writer-artist agreement without some kind of written contract in place that just basically says, not trying to be a dick about this, but I'm agreeing to pay you this much money, and in return, you are agreeing to do this work at roughly this speed. I'm not saying that if we agree on 5 pages a month that you're gonna, give me 5 pages every month. If you do 4 one month and then get back to 5, like there's no problem with that. But you got to have some kind of legal protection, even if it's with someone in another country. Because I think that scares away the scam artists if they start seeing, oh, there might be some like legal repercussions if I don't do this job. I think that scares away the really bad apples. And then I do think that also kind of gives an extra sense of motivation of someone saying, all right, this person's serious. They're not like just anybody off the street. They know what they're doing. I need to really put my best foot forward with them. I also love what you said about like finding the people who have like done projects before. Because one of the questions that I'm going to ask in the future is, I need to make sure that you have not only been hired to do projects, but that you've completed projects and that you have a history of completing projects. And can you please give me references of people who you have worked with, who have hired you, that can speak to your experience there so that I can ask them the same questions that you're saying. How long did it take? How was the collaboration process? Did they give you what you asked for on the page, or did you say, hey, here's the panel I want, and then they gave you something entirely different? I think that's really critical too. So it is a really hard thing to hit, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Another thing you could do is if you bring in an editor, or if the publisher brings in an editor, then you have someone who's a bit of a go-between between you and the artist. And if the artist doesn't deliver, then that's a more significant relationship that they're harming.
Yeah.
They have more to lose if they piss off your editor.
Yeah, that's for sure. We have a question in the Q&A. Did you consider doing a Kickstarter to fund the comic? You can answer and then I'll answer too.
Yeah, I did consider briefly, and then I remembered that I'm not very social and that I hate social media, and that I would be lucky to get $20 from my mum if I did a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
But I think a Kickstarter is a great idea if you have any sort of following, even if it's just, you know, a bunch of Instagram followers. If that can be enough to get you over the line with, if you have a fairly modest goal to start with.
And I think that's the catch-22 of doing a Kickstarter, right? Or even a Patreon. Someone just asked about Patreon. Patreon is for monetizing the following you already have. It's not for building up a following to get the following there. And same for Kickstarter. Yes, you can make a Kickstarter and you can ask your friends to give you money, but really Kickstarters work when people already have fans and they're asking their fans to prepay for the thing that you're going to make. So it doesn't really help in terms of actually getting to the place where you can get your money if you don't have the foundation of people who want to see more stuff that you've done. You have to make something first that is popular to then go to Kickstarter and say, hey, y'all, I'm doing my next project. Like, will you help me with this? Was that kind of what you were thinking too?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I maybe I dismissed Kickstarter too easily, because I actually did a Kickstarter for a short film last year, and I didn't expect it to reach its goal, and it did amazingly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a 25 grand goal, which I thought was completely pie in the sky. But yeah, we managed to do it, and I have no idea why some people decided to back it, but they did.
That's really fascinating. How long did it take you to hit that number?
I think it was 30 days. That's the standard Kickstarter length.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, it started out with like a little trickle, and you see the backers, and you're like, oh yeah, I know that person, I know that person, I know that person.
Right.
And then I started to get people I didn't know, and I looked them up, and I'm like, I have no idea how you even saw this or found it, or why you decided to put $1,000 towards it. But yeah, weird stuff happens on Kickstarter.
That's incredible. So talk a little bit about how you did that campaign. So how much, marketing did you put into it? I know that there are some people who are like professional Kickstarter campaign managers. Like, did you ever think about working with one of those people?
No.
How'd that go for you?
So I do have a production background, and so I was able to make a very polished, professional looking pitch video, which I think kind of sold the viability of the project, and just put a lot of work into making the page read well, and that was it. And I'm sure there's some weird algorithm business going on behind Kickstarter that if you kind of get enough initial investment, then they make sure that other people see it. And there's a lot of people who just seem to, browse Kickstarter looking for something to back. I'm not sure why they do it, but thank you to those people, because they got that project over the line.
Yeah. And what kind of rewards did you give your backers there? I'm guessing access to the film, but like what else?
Yeah, access to the film, some props from it. We had in the film, there's a computer AI voice, because it's a sci-fi short, and so one of the characters is an AI. And one of the rewards was we'd give you a special cut of the film where we put your voice in the place of the AI, so you could be the voice of the AI, not for the actual film that would go to festivals, but for your own personal copy. We had a spacesuit costume that was one of that was the big reward, because that was quite a special costume.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had smaller rewards like production stills and a copy of the script. Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at some comic book Kickstarters, and there was some really like out of the box that you would not expect rewards for their backers. Like some of the most expensive ones were, if you'll give, X number of dollars, we will actually draw you as a background character into a scene of the
Yeah.
comic. And so like that's like a huge one where you like $5,000, like right there, that's like an entire issue for a comic. And if someone really wants to like just be part of that world and that mythos and point to that thing, I think that's just super cool. So finding those kind of like interesting ways to like make this stuff happen, I think is just really, really cool.
Yeah.
But let's kind of have the conversation, because we were talking before about, creator owned comics versus studio owned comics. So did you ever, I guess, first of all, let's define what that is for people. So, and you can stop me if I'm wrong, Bryce, because I have not gotten to this point yet, but the difference here is like a Batman or a Spider-Man or any of those like superheroes from your youth that those are all owned by Marvel, and they're owned by DC, and they're owned by the actual comic publishers. And so those places, that's basically a work for hire job. They hire you to write a storyline for Batman or to draw X number of issues for Batman. And you don't get any kind of residuals from that. Basically, you're paid your rate, and then you're an employee on a contract and you're shuttled out the door, and afterwards they can hire you again, but there's no guarantee coming back. With a creator-owned project like Verve or like Verge, or like Saga, that's owned entirely by you. And so you get, I would assume, a large cut of whatever revenue comes in after that. So I'm assuming that Red 5 was creator-owned?
It was, yes.
Okay.
And I think that's very standard these days for new comics or for smaller publishers, because creator owned represents a lot less risk for the publisher.
Mm-hmm. And then what was the kind of deal like with them? So they're publishing your comic. What was like the cut that they decided to take from that? Like, how were they going to get paid, and how much, if it made money, like, were you going to get paid? Can you kind of talk about the broad numbers of how this was going to go?
Yeah, it was 50-50. It was right down the middle. So they covered all the publishing costs, all the printing costs, all the distribution, all the promotional costs, and it was up to me to fund the comic itself. So I made the comic, they sold it, we split it 50-50 down the middle. They did add one clause that maybe is a little unusual, but it's becoming more common, which is that they get a 25% cut of any adaptation rights. So if it goes back and becomes a TV show, then they get 25% of whatever deal I would make off of that.
So they're taking a piece of the pie for any sort of like adaptation going to film or television.
Yeah.
That's nasty. I hate that. As someone who champions creatives, I absolutely hate that. That's terrible. Gosh. Right. But this is the downside and the upside to creator owned, right? Where the upfront costs are entirely on you. You, the writer, the creator, the person who's making this idea, have to fund the creation of this comic. But then on the flip side, if it goes on to be a huge hit, you also get the benefit of all of like the endless potential money that could come after, right?
Yeah. On that note of the 25% that they take, that actually was good in this case, because it gave them an incentive to share it with contacts they had in the industry. And it actually led to the comic being, I signed a shopping agreement with a really good producer on Verge recently, and that was only through the publisher.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So in this case, you actually were happy to give up that piece of the pie because it really meant that they were going to work harder. Maybe not happy, but at least there was a silver lining in terms of like,
exactly,
they're going to work harder for you because they have something to gain on the back end of it as well.
Yeah. I think because comics are so hot right now, everyone's looking at what they can adapt out of comics. And all those independent comics like Saga, for instance, everyone's looking at what's the next big thing.
For sure. Someone in the Q&A is asking about the pitching process. Did you pitch to or consider other publishers other than Red 5? Kind of go into more detail on that, because I know that you said that you liked the conversation with them because they were story savvy, but what did the other conversations sound like, and what did they say that really made you not want to go with them?
Well, I pitched to, I think, 6 different publishers, and 3 of them didn't write back. So obviously they're out of the running. The others, I felt their enthusiasm wasn't really there for it. It's kind of it's a bit weird. Like when you're writing to a producer or an agent, or anyone that has a lot of power, and you're trying to take a project to them, you're kind of reading between the lines on every little thing they say, and so much interpretation. I felt like Red 5 was very open and honest in what they were saying. They weren't promising the world or anything, whereas some of the other publishers, they were kind of a bit cagey, and the tone was that they were doing me an incredible favor, and that kind of was a bit of a red flag to me. So I think if you're careful and you work out whether this is a publisher you can trust, that's more important than a publisher that can supposedly offer a lot more.
Right. And do you remember, you might not because it was a while ago, but do you remember if any of the other publishers had asked for like a larger slice, either in terms of revenue sharing or of the adaptation pie? Because I've heard as like a much larger slices of the publishers requiring much bigger slices of any adaptation money going to them to get something happening. So do you remember kind of like what any other deals were on the table, or did you not get that far?
I don't think we got that far, but I have heard of that as well. And I think there's actually a few kind of shady companies out there who only make comics so they can pitch them to development executives. And like, it's not a bad strategy, but I wanted to make a comic. I didn't want to make a sneaky backdoor TV show pitch. I wanted it to actually be a comic that would be published and read by people. And that's what Red 5 was offering. So that's what made them the best pick.
I mean, you got to think about it from their perspective. They probably have a really substantial amount of money on the line with that. Because if you think about, let's say that Verge got picked up as a TV series, and let's say it ran for 5 seasons, you could probably expect that Verge is going to get some kind of like executive producing credit out of that. And let's just say that the executive producing credit means that they get $25,000 an episode. Well, if that's 10 episodes at $25,000, that's $250,000. And if it runs for 5 seasons, that's $1.25 million right there in their bank account. That's probably more than they're making on almost all their other, comics combined. So they're probably looking for that big hit to kind of fund them for a while, plus whatever 25% of the cut is there. So I can understand why they would go for that. And you're right. I have seen a lot of publishers who seem like they're really in like the, hey, we want to get all of our stuff out into development. We want to be on Hollywood Reporter. We want to be on Deadline. We want to get our name out there as much as we can, because you can look at the marketplace right now. Why the Last Man got made into a TV series. Snowpiercer got made into a TV series. Lock and Key was a Netflix show. Deadly Class was a Netflix show. I mean, there are so many. Hollywood is just dying for IP right now. Yeah. And have you thought about, now that it is its own IP, going back out to the TV landscape and trying to pitch it, because that they love having that stuff attached to it?
Yeah, well, that's where we're at the moment. So this agreement that I signed with this producer, he's now championing Verge. He's wrapping on a film at the moment, and once he's done, he's going to put together a pitch deck and take it to hopefully people who actually have the money to make it this time. He's quite connected, so I think like he was working at Sony for a long time, so I think he's got the industry contacts to make it happen. So yeah, fingers crossed. But I think maybe it's a good strategy to make a comic so that you can pitch it as IP. But I don't think anyone makes a good comic that way. I think you got to make a comic because you want to make a comic. You want to tell a story in that medium, and the medium matters enough to you to do it well, to do it right, to put your heart and soul into it. It's not just a sneaky tactic to come back to Hollywood with a bit more cachet.
You got to love it, right? Because I feel like, I see that Ruth plugged my articles on Pipeline Artists. I'm going to go back to one of the articles I wrote several years ago. Passion is the ultimate X factor. People can read if a creator, if a writer, if a director is passionate about the project that they have. that's going to permeate through whatever medium it is, whether it's a comic page, whether it's a novel, whether it's a movie. I mean, you can tell when someone's directed a movie and they've just done like a half-assed, don't care about a job, right? So I'm sure that influences you as a creator, and you're working on the short film right now. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on? It's called Earthbound, right?
So that's the feature that I'm working on at the moment. So the short film is called Fading Stars, and it's almost finished. We're in post-production on that now. The feature is in pre-production, and we're putting together cast and crew at the moment. Yeah.
How was the process? Talk about, I guess, the difference between getting that short film made and now how you're kind of preparing to make this feature, because it feels like you're kind of leveling up in that regard. So what are the differences when you look at those two projects?
Well, I really thought of the short film as, I didn't go to film school. So I think of the short film as my film school. And I was the writer, director, producer, pretty much everything. I did a bit of a cinematography as well, doing the editing. So it was kind of entirely on me, pushing that, making it happen, bringing people on board, and doing all that. Whereas with the feature, it's a bit more formal. There's the pre-sales agent and different, all sorts of different people in the mix. So it's not entirely on me to make it happen, which is a nice change. If anyone who's kind of made a short film out of their own savings, it's a torturous process where you've got a lot on the line. And I guess if you don't work with people that are good, it can be very painful, but you can also build some good relationships and then move forward with those relationships to another project.
And so how much of the sales team and I guess of the upper level leadership of the movie did you take from that short film going into the feature? Did you just kind of take the same people and move over to the next bigger project?
I'm taking some of the crew and one of the actors from the short film.
Okay.
So I was working with a cinematographer on the short film, and I was really hoping that he would knock it out of the park, do a really good job, so I could then bring him over to the feature. And he, the images are amazing, but working with him was a bit difficult. He wasn't that reliable. So I'll be using a different cinematographer for the feature. It's not guaranteed that I'll be directing the feature either. Okay. The sales agent is okay with me directing it, but because I haven't made a feature before, it means a smaller pre-sale amount. So we're kind of looking at some different directing options, with the backup option being that I would direct it. And
so this is where I'm a little bit of a novice, so you can help kind of educate me here too. You're funding the feature through the pre-sales that you have already locked in as of today, right? So how did you do the same with the short film? Did you get pre-sales there, or is that more of a finding investors to do that, or your own money? How did you fund that one?
So that was funded through my own money and through the Kickstarter. I've never heard of pre-sales for a short film, because I don't think many short films make any money at all. So I'm very, very surprised if there's pre-sales for it. A lot of short films get made through government screen incentives. So in Australia, we have some really good incentives that the government offers for film production. So for the feature, the pre-sales will cover about 50% of the budget, and then government incentives will cover 40%, and then you have probably 10% of gap financing that'll be done through a gap financing company or through private equity.
Right, and that's investors, right? For that fountain. Yeah. Someone on the Q&A is asking if you can tell us what the budget for the feature is going to be.
Yeah, so it depends on the cast and the crew and the director. Obviously, if we get a really big director, then they'll put up more pre-sales. So the range we're looking at is between 1 and 3.5 million.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah. So if I were to direct it, it would definitely be 1 million, the lowest possible, because in Australia, to qualify for the government production incentives, you have to have a minimum budget of 1 million. Yeah, if a sales agent could give less, they probably would.
Yeah, work in the system to get every advantage you can. I like it. Can you talk a little bit about the sales process? Someone's asking in the Q&A if you got sales estimates from the sales agents. I don't know anything about that, so I would love to kind of hear how that process works.
Yeah, I I believe we do have sales estimates, but I haven't seen them. So I am working with a producer on it, and he has the relationship with the sales agents. So he's facing them. And I think he's only telling me the good news sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure what the sales estimates are, but I do know that the sales agent is very keen on this genre. They think it's a genre that will make a bit of money. It's science fiction. It's low budget. Yeah.
And essentially, the pre-sales are you're selling to other foreign countries that can put it on their TV stations and networks and things like that and kind of play during certain slots, right? That's how that works.
It generally starts with US pre-sales. So you get your domestic pre-sales. It's domestic if you are in the US. I don't call it domestic, of course. And then once you've got the domestic, then you get the international, and then you've got your pre-sales sorted. Yeah.
All right. How long did it take you to start getting pre-sales?
I have no idea. Yeah, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. So basically, you found a producer. Is this like a producing partner, or did you hire this producer? How did you end up getting connected with them?
I met him through another director that I know. He recommended him, and it's actually a little similar to with Verge. So I'd written this screenplay, and he read it and he loved it, and he said, "This needs to be a TV show. Let's make it into a TV show." And so I spent about a year rewriting it, making it into a TV show. And this is the one time where I actually think the notes were wrong. I don't think it worked as a TV show at all.
Mhm.
And after about a year of painful development into a TV show, I sent him an email saying, look, I'm not feeling this. I don't think it works in this format. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. If you want to work with me on making it into a feature, let me know. If not, best of luck. So on. I thought that was the end of the relationship. I didn't think I'd hear from him again. And he called me 20 seconds later and said, "Let's do it. Let's make a feature."
Interesting. It's funny how when sometimes you kind of have that moment with finality where you're like, hey, make a decision, either like walk or let's do this. It's funny how sometimes that really kicks people into action, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then he took his contacts and he basically made a pitch packet, I assume, for your movie and said, hey, here's roughly what the budget's going to be. Here are the comps, and here's where we think we can sell it. Please give us money in terms of pre-sales and saying, hey, you'll put this much money up, and then you can have these rights for, I assume, this many months or this many years after the fact to do with it what you want. And that's kind of how you're starting to fund the movie with the government and with the investors, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, so this would be, if you direct it, your first feature?
First narrative feature. So I've done documentaries before, but that is a totally different thing. And I don't think anyone in Hollywood looks at documentary directing as comparable to feature directing.
Sadly not. They really don't, even though there are some similarities, but you're right. They do kind of take it as a very different beast. Can you kind of talk about some of those differences between documentary and narrative filmmaking?
Yeah. So I think it was Walter Murch, the editor, who worked on Godfather and a lot of great films, who said that each film is born 3 times. There's the script, the production, and then the editing. Mm-hmm. And I think different productions gain more life in different stages. And for documentaries, it's definitely in the editing. It really comes together at that point. And there's no right way to do it, but there is more risk. If your project is not viable until you get to the edit room, then that's a lot of risk that the studio or whoever's funding it is taking. Generally, I think you want to have a good looking film product as early in the process as you can, so you're not saving it in the edit room the way that you often do with documentaries. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge that I'm working on, is how do I take my production mindset out of the editing room and bring it into production and into pre-production.
Yeah. Expand on that a little bit, because I think what you said there right now is really fascinating in terms of saving the movie in the edit room. So do you sometimes feel when you're doing a documentary that you're getting all this footage and it's really great footage, but you don't have a story that you're telling in the documentary to kind of keep people involved? You have to kind of find it through the editing. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think documentaries are they're a bit of a risk. You think something is interesting, so you go out and film it, and you try to film it in a way that is as inobtrusive as possible. You don't want to kind of put too much of yourself into it in the production stage, because you want it to be true to what it is, because it's a real event, it's real people, they're telling you their stories, and you're hoping that when you get all the footage back, that a story starts to emerge. And with a documentary, you want to do a lot of research, a lot of work early on, so you're not planning to save it in the edit room, but that's often where I think documentaries come together.
Interesting.
And a lot of documentaries probably fall apart in the edit room as well, and you don't hear about them.
Right. If something falls apart in the edit room, do you think that's are those mistakes that the documentarians made along the way, or is that just a fault of not planning enough? How do you think that happens?
I think it can be the fault of the director or the producer or whoever was doing the research, or it could just be because you took a risk and it didn't work out. Like sometimes you hear a really good story, but then when it's told on screen, it doesn't land the same way. Or sometimes people just clam up when they're being interviewed and you don't get a story out of them, no matter how much they want to tell their story or you want them to tell their story.
That's true. Because they're not actors that you can tell exactly what to say. You have to take what they say and make a story out of it. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. And my styles really fly on the wall, try to make it as natural as possible, which is, I know a lot of documentary makers who will kind of stage things so that they actually get something usable at the end of the day. And I try not to do that, maybe because it's more challenging anyway. I think it's better to just capture as much as you can and then create something out of it. And that's also my journalistic background. Journalists don't like to bend the truth.
Yeah, you don't want to end up with you don't want to end up with Catfish the movie, which is probably the greatest fake documentary of all time, which is like a story that they just decided that we're gonna create this story in a documentary format and then sell it to MTV as a TV show. Well, we're almost out of time. We did just get one last Q&A. What are some of your favorite comics or graphic novels? This is something that I was going to ask you as well.
Yeah, well, I really like Saga. I think Saga is a great one. I love Bone, Chew, Fables, Sandman. I think is probably the best graphic novel ever written.
I need to try that again. I love Neil Gaiman, but I remember falling off for some reason, and I don't remember why.
I think it does take a bit of investment. It's a lot better than the TV show. Not that the TV show was bad, but the comic is just much better. Pitch perfect. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about sales numbers for your comics? Are you allowed to speak about that?
I am allowed, but I don't have the numbers on me. I think my goal was to kind of break even with the comic, and I think in terms of sales, we got there.
Okay.
So
that's a victory though, because a lot of like first-time comic creators lose money. So the fact that you were able to make that money back is a huge credit to you and your story.
Yeah.
Speaking of Verge, do you want to plug where people can buy it if they want to check it out?
Yes, so you can get it on Amazon, or you can go directly to Red 5's website and order it from there. And you can also get it from a lot of local comic stores. You might need to get them to order it in, because I'm not sure they would have it on the shelf.
Mm-hmm. But they can do that with Diamond, right?
Yeah, you can also order directly from Diamond.
All right. Well, Bryce, we are at time, but this was a really fascinating conversation. And I personally had a lot of like heart-to-hearts, because it's sounding like us having similar problems getting into the comic world, I think is it shows some of the dangers, and hopefully there are people who are watching right now who learn some of the things not to do if they ever want to make their own comics. So I thank you very much for your time, and hope you have a very pleasant morning over there in bright, sunny, warm Australia during your summer.
Thank you. Thanks for the chat. I really appreciate it. And I think I think the last thing I want to say is comics are great. And even if you're not going to write a comic, you should definitely read a comic at some point in your life.
Yes, absolutely. Support indie creators, that's for sure.
I think that is an excellent way to end tonight. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking us through a very awesome comics discussion this evening. I hope everybody learned a little bit something about that journey. It's intricate and it's one of the art forms. And we always here at Symposium encourage creatives to try to branch outside of their mediums and learn something else, you know, like outside of there. Like if you're an author, learn screenwriting. If you're a screenwriter, you know, learn comic books. Why not? So thank you, Spike, for taking us through the Q&A tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Bryce. I hope the rest of your day, the rest of your Thursday there in Australia is a wonderful one. I appreciate you starting out the morning with us today. So
Thank you. My pleasure.
awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And just so everybody knows, this is going to go out in a recording blast probably within the next 48 hours. We do have another symposium coming up next week. Actually, I believe it's on, is it Tuesday or Wednesday, March 15th? I'm not exactly sure which one it is, but it is, it's supposed to be about strategies on how to seek representation. Jeannie is telling me what day it is. What day is it?
It's on Tuesday.
It's on Tuesday, the 21st. That's right. So it is strategies on seeking representation in the film and TV industry with Sonia Alexander. And we're really excited for it. I hope you guys can join us there. You can register on a Symposium site. And yeah, I think that'll close us out. Thank you, fellas. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.